So here's the thing. I'm starting a new project, and in a way, the starting of a new project is where you have the most possibilities. In some ways, it's the most fun. You get to kind of, throw around all your favorite ideas and see what you want to do. But, like, I've done a lot of projects, and this time, I'm honestly just getting kind of annoyed with the starting of a project. And it kind of comes down to this sort of fact that I know I'm going to write down a bunch of things. I know I'm going to decide a bunch of stuff. I'm going to give myself a direction, which I need. And it's not wasted work, it's required. But I also know everything is going to change. And so it kind of becomes this sort of situation where instead of me focusing on like coming up with the right solution, I'm really trying to like build a foundation for everything to work off of. And that's sort of where some of the stress really comes in, because you start to realize if you screw up the part now, like if you start making something that isn't really good, it's not going to just like magically get better because you just have amazing people working on it, or great people, stuff like like at some point, if you're making something that nobody wants, you're going to be stuck with something that nobody wants. But even if you make a really good job doing it, like it's just not gonna work. And so you have to sort of sit down and be like, okay, if I'm going to make a new game, how do I make something that people are going to want, and how do I put a foundation in there that people are gonna really like? And also, this goes on the technology side of like, as I'm sitting down and deciding what systems to build and stuff like that, it's like, what are the simple ways of building my systems? What are the ways of building my systems that allow them to either grow, scaled back, as needed based on like how things test with players. And also like mistakes that you make now in this foundation stage, like previously on a game jam project I worked on, did not abstract a concept for an interactable object, and like everything was either an inventory object of some kind or not, sort of thing. But then I came up into a point where there's only one instance in this tiny little project where I needed to actually like have the player interact with something. But like, because I didn't have that class set up, it was a lot more difficult for me to add that in. And that was honestly a pretty amateurish oversight on my part. But like I should have just had a basic like object interaction class, like for buttons you press and stuff like that. But I was just working fast, and I was just working to do what I needed, and I kind of just forgot about it. So that's something I have to, if I'm going to use this as sort of a base going forward, I need to like add that back in and figure that out. It's honestly not that hard of a change, but it illustrates the point of like foundations on the tech side are very important, and really important for reducing sort of this concept called like tech debt, or basically like when you're working on a software project, game projects especially, there's just some like layer of like code that you put in, and it's just to make things feel right, not necessarily to make things be like smart, or do things the right way. It's just all about feeling, and that code just tends to be really messy because it's just messy and fiddly. It's like make sure this thing aligns this like to the left but not too far to the left, kind of code. It's like it's just stuff you kind of know you're gonna have to throw out if you do a different project. So you want to try to reduce that, especially when you think about like your core, because that becomes tech debt. And especially if you try to like build something off of there, then you just kind of have like the thing that is a little bit to the left but not too left, and then if you build something that's actually to the left on top of that, now you like have this weird chain of like, well, you're putting bugs in or introducing bugs because you have this weird chain of objects kind of all influencing each other. So you just kind of want to avoid that. You want to have a good foundation. I guess the other side of it too is like when you think about that foundation, you start thinking about like I've said it before, but an interesting game has to ask interesting questions. And I think the problem that I'm running into is I have to decide sort of what those questions are going to be, and like what am I going to ask of the player, and then also like what questions do I want to not ask. And I think another big part of that's going to be too like, how am I going to ask those questions? And are these going to be like big questions, or are these going to be like little questions? Are these going to be like the can you get here with like the weird powers that you have in this game, or is it going to be more like like what's the right thing to do? Those are like a little bit bigger questions, and I think those are probably the ones that keep people playing when they're not playing, if you will. Thinking about the game outside of the game. And then like back to production stuff. You also have this question too of like, okay, I want to make this game that asks these questions. that does these certain things, maybe has a certain style, gets players to think in a certain way. But like, how do I actually build that, and how do I make a process that's not too annoying to deal with? And am I going to have collaborators? What scale of production am I going to be at? All of those questions come up too, and like those are the ones that are kind of hard to change. They're the ones that are hard to change when you start a project versus like in the middle of a project. In the middle of a project, deciding, oh, I guess we're gonna go from like 10 people to 100, that's going to cause a lot of problems, and your processes probably aren't going to be in place for that. And a lot of people, sort of either have trouble with this, or they just forget about it or decide it's not important, and it becomes a problem down the line. I guess you could say like a lot of video games, video game developers, they started these small 20-person teams, and then they became 100-person teams, and then they became 200-person teams, and then they became 500 people teams, and it's like as they've been increasing that scale constantly, though they haven't been updating their tech. They've been accruing that tech debt. They've been just having problems. And yeah, they still get to have that fun moment of starting a project and all those blue sky sort of things. But then you kind of realize they end up making a game kind of like their last game, because that's the foundation that they have built, and they didn't do the work to either maintain their foundation or to build a new foundation. That's tough. And so I guess for me, I sitting here and I'm looking at a hole in the ground, thinking like, how am I going to fill this with a foundation? Not just for the design work and for the tech work, and then for the processes for other people to work with. But it's just this kind of all of that together. That infinite possibilities, but infinite pitfalls. That's about all I got about that.